My name is Isla Vance. I'm 31 years old, and on a Tuesday night in the first week of November, at 11:47 in the evening, my brother appeared at my apartment door holding a 2-page document and asked me to sign my name to a meeting that never happened. He had called first, from a number I didn't recognize, and said it was urgent. He said the family needed me. He said he was on his way and then disconnected before I could answer. I stood in my kitchen in Bethesda with the phone in my hand and thought about the last time I agreed on something because someone told me the family needed me. That was 4 years ago. I was still untangling myself from it. He arrived in 20 minutes. He didn't wait for me to step back from the door. He sat on my couch, put his elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor the way he always does when he's already decided what he wants and is working backward toward a version of the ask, "That sounds reasonable." My brother is 32 years old. He runs a wealth management firm in Washington, D.C. His photograph appears in 2 regional business publications. He has a house in McLean, a wife who chairs volunteer committees, and the specific ease of a man who has spent his entire life being told he is exactly where he should be. Our parents never said it plainly, but they said it in every way that counted, in who they called first with good news, whose opinion they repeated when they wanted to sound certain, how quickly a conversation about my life became a conversation about his. He pulled a document from his jacket pocket and held it out. It was 2 pages on his firm's letterhead, dated October 14th. The heading read, "Affidavit of Independent Board Witness." At the bottom, 2 signature lines, his name beneath one, mine beneath the other. I read it without touching it. The document stated that I had attended a board meeting at his firm on the afternoon of October 14th, that I had been present as an independent witness, that the board had voted unanimously to authorize a series of transfers from the foundation's portfolio into a separate operational account. I had not attended any meeting on October 14th. I also knew, with more precision than he understood, exactly what those transfers were. There was no meeting, I said. There was a call. You were going to join and had something at work. This documents what the board decided. You're just confirming the record. The record doesn't include me, because I wasn't there. We're adding you retroactively as an outside party. It strengthens the documentation. It makes me a witness to something I never witnessed. He looked at me. That look, I have known it my entire life. The one that says I am overcomplicating something simple, that the reasonable version of events is his version, and my resistance is the only unreasonable element in the room. You work for the government, he said. You understand that sometimes records need to be organized before outside parties start asking the wrong questions. What outside parties? He didn't answer. Before I could push further, I heard knocking at my door. I had not given my mother my current address, my brother had. She came in with my father behind her, both still in their evening clothes from wherever they'd been. My mother looked around my apartment with the brief, automatic assessment she always makes when she visits. Small. She was thinking, small and sparse. And then she looked at the document on the coffee table and at me, and her first words were, "Your brother needs his family right now." Not hello. Not I'm sorry for coming so late, your brother needs his family. My father took the chair by the window. He has spent his career managing money and the people who have it, and somewhere in 30 years of that, he developed the manner of a man who is always the steadiest person in the room. He looked at the document, he looked at my brother, he looked at me. "Walk me through your hesitation," he said. I almost laughed. Walk me through your hesitation, as if I were a reluctant client he was about to bring around. The document describes something that didn't happen, I said. It describes a board acting within its governance authority. Your name adds an independent record. It adds a false one. My mother sat beside my brother on the couch. She reached over and touched his arm the way she has always touched his arm, the gesture that says, "I am behind you. Nothing is unfixable, we handle our own." She has never touched my arm that way. I don't think she realizes it. "Nobody is asking you to lie in court," she said. "A sworn affidavit is a statement under penalty of perjury. You've always made everything harder than it needs to be." She said it quietly. The way you say something you've believed so long you no longer notice you're saying it out loud. My father stood and moved to the center of the room. He outlined what he wanted with the efficiency of someone who had already worked through it before arriving. My brother would say the October gathering had been an informal call, that the affidavit was simply formalizing decisions the board had already agreed to, verbally. My mother would contact 2 board members who had been on that call and ask them to confirm the same timeline. My sister-in-law, who was on her way, would prepare an internal firm memo placing the date correctly, and I would sign as an outside party whose presence lent the document weight. He said all of this the way you deliver a plan that has already been approved, not as a suggestion but as a summary. You've already divided up the roles, I said. I've thought through the moving parts. You're coordinating false statements from multiple people about an active federal investigation. He looked at me with something that was almost patience. Obstruction requires intent to impede a legal proceeding. What we're doing is clarifying a record. That is a meaningful distinction. I had spent 6 years in rooms with people who described criminal behavior using the vocabulary of administrative process. It had never stopped being remarkable to me. And if I don't sign, I said. My father's expression remained even. Then we have a problem. Because without a clean record, this becomes harder to contain. And if it becomes harder to contain, people start looking at who escalated it. People start wondering whether the person who flagged this investigation had personal reasons for doing so. He paused. You were passed over for a promotion 2 years ago. Your brother built a successful firm. Those things are visible. They create a narrative. There it was. He had just told me that if I refused, they would suggest to investigators that I had targeted my brother out of professional jealousy, that I had used my access and my position to engineer a case against him. I had seen this particular move before, not in my family's living room, but in cases I had worked, where subjects of investigations attempted to reframe the investigator as the corrupt party. I excused myself to the bathroom. I closed the door and sent a text to my direct supervisor. The message was brief. Brother asked me to sign backdated affidavit for active referral. Parents present. Father just stated they may attempt to frame my involvement as personally motivated. I am not signing. Documenting this contact now. She responded in under 5 minutes. Do not sign anything. This contact is being logged as potential obstruction. Continue to document. You are protected. I came back to the living room. My sister-in-law had arrived while I was gone. She looked at me with the particular confidence of someone who has never had reason to doubt which side of a room she belongs on. You've spent 6 years in a government office reviewing other people's numbers, she said. My husband built a firm from nothing. He employs people. He manages their futures. You can sit here and talk about paperwork and protocol, but I think what's really happening is that you've spent years watching him succeed while you stayed invisible. And now you and finally have a way to matter, and you're taking it. She thought she was saying something devastating. She thought she was naming the real motive, the one I had been hiding. I had heard versions of this before, not from her, but from the voice in my own head that I had spent years learning to stop trusting. Before I tell you what I said next, I need to ask you something directly. If you were sitting where I was sitting that night, if the person your family wanted you to protect was someone you were already building a case against, what would you do? I want to know where you're watching from right now, and I want you to understand that what happened next was not easy, and it was not fast. I walked to the shelf beside my desk and picked up the slim leather case where I keep my agency credentials. I set it open on the coffee table. My title, printed beneath the seal of the United States Department of the Treasury, Senior Analyst, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Below that, my division. Below that, my name. My mother read it once. Then again. My brother's expression changed in a way I had never seen on him before. Not anger, not calculation, but something closer to the recognition that a situation has moved entirely beyond the version he was managing. My father read the credentials and set them down carefully and looked at the window for a long moment before he turned back. You're on the investigation, he said. I'm on the investigative team. I flagged the referral 3 weeks ago before I recognized the firm name. Once I identified the connection, I disclosed it immediately. I was not removed because doing so at that stage would have required an explanation that could have compromised the case. I am not the lead analyst, but I have been legally prohibited from discussing this matter with anyone connected to the subject of the investigation, including tonight. My brother's voice came out quiet. You knew this whole time. I was prohibited from telling you. You're my sister. And you came to my home and asked me to sign a document that would have made me a co-conspirator. My sister-in-law said, you were gathering evidence while we sat in your living room. I was documenting an obstruction contact. There is a difference. We're your family. My family sat in my living room and divided up roles in a cover-up, and when I hesitated, my father outlined how you would reframe my entire career as a personal vendetta. I looked at him. I documented that too. My mother began to cry, not the kind of crying that comes from grief. The kind that comes from realizing a situation has outrun the story you were telling yourself about it. My father said nothing else that night that I want to repeat. Investigators came to my apartment the following morning. My supervisor and a colleague from our legal division were present throughout my statement. The conversation from the night before, the document, the coordinated plan my father had outlined, the threat about my motives, was all logged. My brother's attorney was notified that the obstruction contact had been recorded and preserved. I was placed on administrative distance from the active case, not removed, but restricted from contributing further analysis while the contact was under review. The lead investigator continued without me. The case closed 7 months later. What the full investigation found exceeded my initial documentation. 118 transactions, $261,000, drawn from 23 client accounts over 22 months. The client affected most significantly was a retired postal worker named Hubert Grasso. He was 77 years old. He had contributed the bulk of his retirement savings to the foundation after his wife passed away, because she'd spent the last year of her life wanting their money to go somewhere that would outlast them. Of the $180,000 Hubert had contributed, $94,000 had been quietly moved into an operational account that serviced my brother's firm overhead. He found out on a Wednesday afternoon, from an investigator who was not me, when his daughter called the foundation to check the balance. That is how these things often surface. Not through dramatic confrontation, but through a phone call on an ordinary afternoon, when someone is simply trying to account for what they trusted to another person. I was not permitted to contact him. I sent a written statement through proper channels acknowledging my connection to the firm and confirming that I had disclosed it at every stage. I wanted the record to be complete. My brother pleaded guilty to wire fraud, misappropriation of charitable assets, and obstruction. He received a prison term, a restitution order covering the full amount across all 23 accounts, and a permanent prohibition from working in financial services. His firm was dissolved. The dissolution affected 11 employees who had no knowledge of what he had done and no part in any of it. My father was not charged criminally, but he was identified in the court filings as a participant in the obstruction contact. His professional association reviewed his conduct. Several long-standing clients ended their relationships with him. He told relatives that I had weaponized my government position to destroy my brother's career out of resentment. He did not mention that I had declined to use my position to shield my brother from the consequences of what he had actually done. In his version, those were the same act. They are not. My mother did not speak to me for 5 months. When she finally called, she said she needed time to understand what had happened. I told her I understood. I did not tell her what I was thinking, which was this. Hubert Grasso's daughter called the foundation on an ordinary Wednesday to check on her father's savings and learned that nearly half of them were gone. He did not get time to process it gradually. He got a phone call. I thought about him often in those months. I thought about all 23 families, about what it means to trust someone with something that belongs to you, not just money, but the future that money was meant to secure. The retirement my brother had borrowed against to cover his operating expenses, the comfort he had treated as a resource. I thought about what my family had never understood about my work, that the numbers in those files are not numbers. They are decisions people made at the end of long lives about what mattered. They are the accumulated savings of people who worked and waited, and, at the end, trusted someone to hold it carefully. I had spent 6 years treating that responsibility seriously. I had done it without explaining it to anyone at family dinners, because when I tried, the conversation moved on, because what I did existed, in my family's understanding, somewhere between irrelevant and invisible. They built their entire plan on that invisibility. My brother wrote to me 9 weeks into his sentence. The letter was not an apology in any form I recognized as one. It said he understood why I had made the choices I made. It said the family was struggling. It said he hoped I would be open to communication when things settled. I read it once and put it in a drawer. My sister-in-law did not write. The ethics review of my conduct was completed 6 months after sentencing. The agency found that I had handled every disclosure, every recusal, and every restriction correctly. The review noted that my early identification of the irregularities, before I had recognized the firm name, had actually provided a cleaner evidentiary foundation than if the file had been assigned later to someone with no initial exposure. My supervisor added a note to my personnel file. I keep it in the same drawer as my brother's letter, and I don't take it out often, because I don't need it to know what I did. What I return to, when I think about that November night, is not the credentials on the coffee table. Not my father's silence when I told him I had documented the obstruction contact. Not even my brother's expression in the moment he understood the situation had moved beyond any version he could manage. What I return to is the moment before he arrived. I was standing alone in my kitchen, reading the document he had photographed and sent ahead of himself, and I felt the familiar pull. The pull that said, "This will cost something." The pull that said, "Think carefully about what it means to be the one who refuses." The pull that said, "Is this really the hill you want to stand on?" I had said yes to that pull once before. 4 years ago, when he asked me to provide a character reference that stretched what I actually knew about a business associate. I said yes because my mother looked at me that afternoon the way she usually looked at him, and I was still, at 27, trying to earn something I did not yet understand could not be earned by making myself useful. What I taught him with that yes was that I was available, that my name, my credibility, the careful thing I was quietly building, he could borrow any of it when his own became inconvenient. My compliance didn't make him think better of me. It taught him the terms under which I could be used. The second time he asked, I was not the same person who had said yes the first time. Not because I had grown colder, or harder, or indifferent to my family, but because I had spent 6 years building something that belonged entirely to me, a record, a set of skills that no one in my family had ever asked about, and I had finally understood that giving it away would not make me loved. It would only make me useful in the way that tools are useful, picked up when needed, set aside when not. I stood in my kitchen at 11:47 on a Tuesday night and put the phone down. I did not need the credentials. I did not need the text message to my supervisor or the ethics review or the court filing. I needed to be the person who knew what was being asked and said no before anyone arrived to see me do it. My family believed that invisibility and emptiness were the same thing, that because they had never looked closely at my life, there was nothing inside it worth protecting. They built a plan to use me on exactly that assumption. The truth did the rest. I simply stopped helping them stay wrong about it.